And because I almost never read anything light and breezy. I had to start hunting what I could talk about. But something happened.
You could have asked me.
Yes, that is true. But along the way, as I was looking up things, I started reading about the Opium Wars for some reason, right? So light and breezy goes out of the window. So this episode, we are going to talk about how the British absolutely fucked over China, by getting their people addicted to opium twice.
Mm.
And we are going to talk about the specific and insane ways the British did that.
अश्मिता को ट्रिगर
Okay.
करना बहुत आसान है.
I get triggered on everything. Oh, I have to triggering reminds me. I have to tell you this, Sandy. I haven't told you this also. So there's a client I'm working with, and he's also a friend now, but essentially, primarily, we met because of work and everything, right? So that's when I realized that I probably get triggered with by everything, because he sent he sent a meme to me that says, "Mom raised a complainer, not a quitter. Uh, I'm going to get it done, but you're going to hear about it." And he sent it to me saying, "This reminds me of you." Like, what the fuck? I work for you, dude.
दोस्त और कलीग के बीच में कंफ्यूज हो गया वो मीम भेजते टाइम.
No, but that just means that considering we have been closely working for like 2 months, only less than 2 months, I must have complained to him so much. And this is a remote setup. I don't work full time with him, so I'm not spending as much time, but whatever little time I have spent, he knows this about me. So this is just, it's just
I mean,
sad.
that just means that you're giving off these extremely strong vibes from the get-go, Ashmita.
Oh God.
You're
अब
not
अब बस.
leaving any room for discussion or interpretation. You just, this is
None
me.
whatsoever. It's just coming across immediately that this woman is going to crib a lot. But I'm glad he thinks that I can get the job done, because otherwise that would be really, really bad. So yeah. Prakar, we missed you on
Yeah,
Friday's
how was it?
party.
I How was it?
It was nice. We left early, Sandy and I, because
Got
Sandy had woke her up at fucking 5 a.m. So by 10 p.m., Sandy was dying. Like anyway, Sandy doesn't talk. Right? Like, you're just used to Sandy just sitting there and not talking to people, and people trying to make conversation with him, but Sandy just responding a little bit and then shutting down very quickly. So anyway, that is Sandy.
Might I add, I had a raging headache at the time as well. So
Yeah,
I
so I
genuinely did
was
not want to talk even more
हाँ.
so than normal.
I was telling
हाँ,
him.
Sandy does talk. Sandy does talk, but मतलब occasionally.
Occasionally,
But
yeah.
given it was all friends, like close group, Sandy, he does talk.
Sandy needs a couple of drinks to start talking. Uh,
So he didn't drink.
he was, but by the time the second drink was half done, Sandy was already
Hmm.
dying. So we had to come back home, which I was okay with, because after that apparently the party had dancing and all, and I'm not interested in that. So yeah, so but
You should have
otherwise.
stayed. You should have stayed. You might have hired someone after that. Because that's the trend I've heard. You go to a party, people start dancing, and then you hire people.
That I never did that. That Sandy did. Not specifically Sandy, but the three guys running Melwood, they
I
did.
I did not. This was our two other friends
Yeah,
that did this. I did not do that personally.
even I got
Actually,
hired like
listen,
that.
I have a question. Most of the people were hired by our two other friends. If it was up to you, who would you not hire?
Ooh.
I know a very.
I don't know. I never really thought about it. So to be
I
very
can give
honest,
you a list who should not have been hired.
not in retrospect. No, you can't see that in retrospect. Retrospect, everything is hindsight is 2020,
Yeah,
right?
I
You
mean, in
can't do that in
retrospect,
retrospect.
I mean,
Yeah.
we are sitting in 2020. What is this now? 2026?
6.
6.
Yeah.
Yes. No, but to be very honest, I think I was telling you this the other day as well, Ashmita. I think 95% of all the hirings we made for Melwood were because we desperately needed somebody to cover a project like tomorrow,
Yeah, yeah,
basically,
yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
so we didn't really have a choice to pick the cream of the crop, and not to mean that people were bad or terrible or whatever. It's just that it was a roll of a dice. Some people turned out really good, some people turned out not so good. So I can't really make a sweeping judgment like that
Jesus, I
because
Some turned out
remember.
terrible.
pretty much all of them
You
were hired in a moment of desperation.
Yeah,
you
that
can
I
be honest,
remember.
some were terrible.
Some were horrible, dude. I remember.
Yes, I agree. In hindsight, yes, but
Yeah,
it is what it is, man. It literally a roll of the dice. So you
yeah,
could never tell how good or bad
Fair
someone
enough.
was.
yeah.
So
Okay.
Ashmita, do you have a segue?
Yes, surprisingly, I
Ooh,
do. In the light of it's a very very tenuous segue, but I will go for it.
please
Uh,
please don't tell me it's about the boys or the
it's
Thailand trip or anything related to Thailand.
no, it is not. But speaking of partying, I was actually looking to talk about something light and,
Yeah.
nice this episode. That let's I've been talking about really heavy things all of these episodes. So let me do something light, and let me do, and especially because I have like two episodes back to back to prepare. So I thought of doing one of them as a light one. And because I almost never read anything light and breezy. I had to start hunting what I could talk about. But something happened.
You could have asked me.
Yes, that is true. But along the way, as I was looking up things, I started reading about the Opium Wars for some reason. Right? So light and breezy goes out of the window. So this episode, we are going to talk about how the British absolutely fucked over China, by getting their people addicted to opium twice. Okay?
Mm,
And we are going to talk about the specific and insane ways the British did that. Right? Now, a caveat right off the top, right? The opium wars were very complex. They were, by complex, I don't mean that we can give the benefit of doubt to the British under any circumstance. They were absolute assholes. But there's a lot that was happening. Like internally, also China had a lot of things going on, and we cannot get into all of that. So this will be more of an overview of the first and second opium wars. There were two opium wars, and probably sometime in the future we are going to do a little bit more of a deep dive in what was happening with China internally, right? So
mm.
that's what we are talking about today.
Listen, I think this was in our history book in like during our school days. Opium, like growing opium is very tough, right? It's not that easy to
Yes,
grow opium,
yes, it's a
right?
whole process.
Mm,
It's the poppy plant that you grow. The cultivation would happen in India. It also used to happen in China. Like the East has a medicinal history with opium. But like everything else, Western imperial powers and capitalism fully fucked with this up, right? Like otherwise, we weren't in a bad shape with opium. Like any drug, right? Like modern medicine uses drugs, but the moment you make it one available willy nilly, and second you make it like a mass production thing, you make it addictive specifically, that's when it gets
mm,
really really messed up. That's also a part of what happened in these two opium wars. But yeah, we read very briefly. For some reason we do not read about Asian history so much. We just read about Indian history, which is just one small part of Asia, and we read about the Western history, but we do not read as much about the rest of Asia. So,
mm.
like, I got to know a bunch of things that I had absolutely no idea about. And I have looked this up before. Despite that, so much of information was new to me only. So we're going to start off with that, and we're going to start off with the history of the first Opium War, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the mid 19th century, Western imperial powers like UK, France, and US, they were aggressively colonizing the world, right? But by mid 19th century, they were not colonizing by going over there and establishing themselves as the rulers. But this time, so it was not just through military, but it was through two most powerful tools at man's disposal, which was capitalism and religion. And these two play a role in both of these wars, right? So by the mid 1800s, these OG colonizers, right, UK, France, and US, they were
OG.
fully, they were OG colonizers. They were fully in the hellhole called free trade, right? They,
Hmm.
what that also meant was that their militaries were insanely powerful. And you look at this across history, we tend to forget this, but how there seems to be this insane correlation between how free trade is versus how quickly these countries take away anything resembling freedom in other countries. That has been absolutely the trend. So obviously by mid 1800s these guys were going around the rest of the world bringing democracy to other places, right?
Triple tax. Yani teen guna lagandega.
And at this same point of time, much of Asia was already under colonial rule, right? we
Hmm.
were we were under colonial rule. The British were ruling us. Parts of the world were ruled by French. So all of this was already happening. I think US was the one that went ahead with the free trade colonizing part, except, instead of directly jumping and ruling people. Equally worse, but yeah. Except China. China was not under any colonial rule, but it had its own imperial dynasty at this time called the Qing dynasty, Qing.
Yeah.
And the first Opium War, called the Poppy War, also called the Poppy War, happened between 1839 and 1842. A smallish war between the Qing dynasty and the UK. The Qing dynasty that was ruling China,
Hmm.
right? And to understand what happened between these 4 years, right, 39 to 42, 1839 to 1842, we have to go back a few decades. So in the late, actually more than a few decades, in the late 1600s, the Qing dynasty rose to power. And in 1680s, it started relaxing the maritime trade restrictions that China had imposed before that. So China used to be a very, very closed economy, as was the trend in those days. Like there was trade, but trade was very controlled and very limited, and each sovereign body would decide its trade policies, like its whole country policies, on its own. There wouldn't be a lot of intervention. That changed a lot in the coming decades, which continues till today, right? And when Qing dynasty came into power, they wanted, of course, more of, because China, as is the case with Asia, we produce a lot of valuable things, right? So China wanted to take a little bit of advantage over that, and you can't do that without opening the borders a little bit. So they started
Hmm.
relaxing it just a little. And the British took advantage of this. And in the 1680s, what they started doing was they started shipping Indian cotton, because we were fully under colonial rule and we were forced to grow a lot of cotton. So, our cotton and British silver to China. And China would export tea and other goods like porcelain and silk. And silk was, of course, a major thing, right, to Britain. And this continued for many years, which was fine. But there was a problem, right? The
Hmm.
problem was, now, as we know, the British love their tea, right? And they did so back in the 18th and 19th century as well. So Chinese tea was quite a valuable property. But we also know that UK doesn't produce anything worthwhile to export, right? Like, you don't want to eat mushy peas and mashed potatoes and everything. Like, what on earth does Britain have even today that
Hmm.
you'd want, right? So there was no such.
Fascism.
British did did export xenophobia into China much later. But, like, Chinese citizens didn't really need anything from Britain. So there was a massive trade imbalance. Yeah. So at that time, China would only accept silver as payment, and Britain had to pay a lot of silver to China, for
Hmm.
their tea and porcelain and silk. Not just Britain, all of Europe. So, to be specific, I have taken this from some historical records. From the mid 17th century onward, China received around 28 million kgs of silver, primarily from the European powers. Okay, so there was a massive trade imbalance. Like, imagine this is the 1680s, right? 1680s, early 1700s, right? So, huge trade imbalance. China was at a massive advantage. In response,
Hmm.
the British did what they did best, which is exploit people, right? So in the 1700s, Britain started forcing Indian farmers in Bihar and Bengal to grow poppy. Okay. You
Hmm.
will remember this time as the same time as the Bengal famine happened.
Yeah, yeah.
The famine was fully manufactured. Britain completely didn't give a fuck. But also at this point of time, the poppy cultivation continued. We were still making
Yeah.
opium. In fact, there are records of people eating opium husks, like poppy husks, to survive. Right? It was really bad. So
And India had never seen a famine before that or even after the British rule, right? That was the
I
only time
think
when,
there were two famines in Bengal.
but
yes,
One
both
was
under
during,
British.
both
yes,
on the
one was during
British.
this time, and one
Yeah.
second time, if I'm not mistaken, was during the indigo thing was happening,
Yes.
when the farmers were being forced to grow indigo.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
both the same condition, making them
Yeah.
grow. India, especially Bengal and Bihar, with the river flowing from these cities and the soil being what it was, what it still is, it had a lot of fertile soil, and a large part
Yeah.
of that was meant for food, and British completely fucked that up, right?
No,
We
I was
forgot
just saying that the entire Himalayan region is very
fertile.
good for very fertile. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
they
yeah.
chose the areas accordingly.
Yes,
But also that is the length of Ganga, right? So the
yes,
Ganga is
Yeah,
extremely fertile
yeah,
along the
yeah,
banks
yeah,
of the Ganga.
yeah.
yeah.
So British began doing that in India and exporting it to China in the 1700s. By the 1800s, within a century, the balance of trade had completely reversed. Because to nobody's surprise, opium was massively popular, right? It was initially hailed in China, like I mentioned top of the episode, that for its medical benefits. But the crisis of opium addiction was increasing too far, right? Like, it was increasing far too much. So China obviously did what at that point of time everybody used to do, which is prohibition. They banned both the production and import of opium. And then a few years later, they also outlawed smoking opium. So, both on demand and supply side, they cracked down really, really heavily, right? And
I'm
I'm,
sure that must have worked, no?
yeah,
Surely. You're about to tell me it worked, right? Please tell me it worked.
considering there was a war, you can only imagine. So, I'm
So yeah,
quote,
it worked.
uh, totally, completely. As always, prohibition always works. So I'm quoting from this Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. I use this as one of my major sources. It was quite well written because I also tried using British sources, but the way they have written about this is really disturbing. So I'm not going to quote from there. I have just validated the incidents from each other. The language is troubling, including of Britannica, right? So I quote, in response, the British India Company hired private British and American traders to transport the drug to China. This is smugglers,
Hmm.
basically, right? Chinese smugglers bought the opium from British and American ships anchored off the Guangzhou coast. Guangzhou is the coast that was open for trade, right? And distributed it within China through a network of Chinese middlemen. By 1830, there were more than 100 Chinese smugglers' boats working the opium trade. This reached a crisis point when in 1834, the British East India Company lost its monopoly over British opium. That was the crisis, right? To compete for customers, dealers lowered their selling price, which made it easier for people in China to buy opium, thus spreading further use and addiction. In less than 30 years, from 1810 to 1838, opium imports to China increased from 4,500 chests, the large containers, chests are the large containers that used to ship drugs, right? So from 4,500 chests to 40,000. As Chinese consumed more and more imported opium, the outflow of silver to pay for it increased from about 2 million ounces in the early 1820s to over 9 million ounces a decade later. In 1831, the Chinese emperor, already angry that opium traders were breaking local laws and increasing addiction and smuggling, discovered that members of his army and government and even students were engaged in smoking opium. I don't know why this organization has put even students in brackets, because who else would be smoking opium? Like, what nonsense. Of course students are smoking
Maybe
opium.
maybe people took their education very seriously back then. I don't know.
uh,
I
Students are
guess.
students across history. Like, what are they going to do? Of course, they're going to they're going to
And do you
smoke
think
drugs
this
that
is
are
just a
okay.
theory? This is just a hypothetical theory, but maybe it has also something to do with Confucianism because that was very big in China. It
Yes.
still is, I
So
think.
yes, but also at that, this was also where the in the second opium war the religion came in. So in some ways they were very very open, right? But in the Western standards they were very closed, right? Same thing with India, right? There were a lot of things we were completely okay with, including certain kinds of recreational drugs, mostly for medicinal purposes, but we also used them
That's
recreationally.
what we say. Even today, that's what we say.
Sure,
That's what I've heard at least.
sure,
I would know.
sure. Plus, we had a very good outlook towards LGBTQ people. We were far more open with. Don't get me wrong, we had immense problems, right? The caste system was a problem. Before the British came in, before the British ruled, there were kingdoms. Kingdoms had their own issues. We had issues. There was no doubt about it. All of every single country on the planet has issues. But what the colonizers did was just come in and increase the issues. Nothing was resolved. Like caste system is still a problem. It's we are sitting in 2026 and there are still people being killed on
Yeah.
the based on caste, but and specifically privileged people killing the underprivileged castes. But the British didn't help. Like they just made things far worse for a
Talking of
tragedy.
things that make it far worse, here is an ad break. And we'll see you on the other side. All right. Welcome back from the ad break. Now back to the episode. Back to you, Ashmita.
Yeah. So we were talking about China's restrictions on opium supplies and what British did, right? So as China's crackdown increased with destruction of opium supplies, they were not just banning, they were also, you know, capturing it. That's what happens in prohibition, right? Black market thrives, and then you capture the supplies and you try and destroy them, and then black market thrives even more. So all of this was happening. As this was happening, British started losing their shit, right? So the tensions started escalating, and there were parliamentary debates and discussions in Britain. But like most debates and discussions in the West, it led to war, right? And I'm quoting again from the Asia Pacific Foundation article. So, for the British, Lin's destruction of opium, Lin I think it's called Zexu, Zexu. I uh, apologize for the pronunciation. He was basically a Chinese official who completely led the destruction. Because in China also they were debating whether we should regulate it or whether we should prohibit it. And Lin completely was for prohibition and he led this. Okay. So I'm going back to the quote. For the British, Lin's destruction of the opium was an affront to British dignity and their concepts of trade. Many British merchants, smugglers, and the British East India Company had argued for years that China was out of touch with civilized nations, which practiced free trade and maintained normal international relations through consular officials and treaties. This is a very standard Western narrative, right? That
Hmm.
you lack civilization, right? So I continue the quote. More to the point, British representatives in Guangzhou requested that merchants turn over their opium to Lin, guaranteeing that the British government would compensate them for their losses. The idea was that in the short term, this would prevent a major conflict and that it would keep the merchants and ship captains safe while reopening the extremely profitable China trade in other goods. The huge opium liability. By this time, the opium was worth millions of pounds sterling, right? The huge opium liability and increasingly shrill demands from merchants in China, India, and London, when they discovered their profits were destroyed, gave politicians in Great Britain the excuse they were looking for to act more forcefully to expand British imperial interests in China. War broke out in November 1839 when Chinese warships clashed with British merchantmen.
Mhm.
In June 1840, 16 British warships and merchantmen, many leased from the primary British opium producer, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correct, and honestly, I don't give a fuck, Hardin, Matheson, and Co., arrived at Guangzhou. Over the next 2 years, the British of forces bombarded forts, fought battles, seized cities, and attempted negotiations. A preliminary settlement called for China to cede Hong Kong to the British Empire and pay an indemnity and grant Britain full diplomatic relations. It also led to the Qing government sending Ling Zexu into exile. Chinese troops, using antiquated guns and cannons with limited naval ships, were largely ineffective against the British. Dozens of Chinese officers committed suicide when they could not repel the British Marines, steamships, and merchantmen. It got bad. It got
Yeah. Yeah.
really bad. Yeah. China faced the repercussions of these two wars for a long time to come. It was bad, right? There are a few arguments. I don't know about the validity of these arguments, right? That China became weak enough for Japan to invade because of these wars. Okay, but
Hmm.
I don't know, right?
Sounds plausible. We don't know for sure, but it sort of sounds
So, yeah,
plausible. It adds up.
yeah.
Yeah.
So finally, in 1842, the Chinese officials were held at gunpoint and made to sign a peace treaty. It is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds.
I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds peaceful enough. I mean, no shots were fired. Everyone stays alive. I mean, it's win-win, no?
Yep. Everybody was very happy
Did they
about
all, after
it.
the signing of the treaty, did they all sit around and smoke hookah and opium?
And opium.
Or
Opium was
Yes.
banned in Britain, so fuck knows.
the smugglers had got to China, no?
Yes, yes. Anyway, so this treaty that they signed was called the Treaty of Nanjing. Poor Nanjing, man. Nanjing has gone through absolute shit across history, right? The treaty was called the Treaty of Nanjing and was obviously completely in favor of British. So, what did they get out of it? A few things. One, a massively advantageous deep water port at Hong Kong, right? A huge compensation to be paid to the British government and merchants for the loss of illegal substances into the country. Five new Chinese treaty ports where British merchants and their families could reside. This wasn't allowed before. Extraterritoriality for the British citizens residing in these treaty ports. This means that they were subject to British, not Chinese laws, right?
This is weird.
Yes, it was at
Everything is
gunpoint.
weird.
All of it was
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah. And then a most favored nation clause that meant that any rights gained by any other foreign country would automatically apply to Britain as well.
Huh.
Yep, it was bad. And China got no advantage whatsoever. Chinese imports of opium rose. They rose to
Hmm.
a peak of 87,000 chests from 45,000 to 87,000 in 1879. It was massive. And let me
Hmm.
just quickly show you the chart that shows the growth. Is basically opium imports into China from 1650 to 1880. In 1650, it was barely anything, like it is very near to the zero
Hmm.
line. By 1880, it has reached 7,000 metric tons, right? This was, I mean, we are of course going to put it up on Insta and other artistic representations of the opium trade as well. But essentially, this shows
What artistic representations do you think we do?
what? There are no photographs from that time, so there are paintings which I'm going to show,
Ah, okay.
which
I
I'm going to
thought you
put up
meant
on Insta.
artistic representations of the graphs. I mean, what other artistic representation do we need to show of the graph? It's a
No,
fucking graph.
graph will put up as is. There's going to be no artistic. This thing, the other pictures I'm talking about that we're going to put up, that
We'll
is going
put
to
up
show
a
you the.
doodled graph.
This is a
Or a
doodled
graph in
graph.
cursive. I don't know.
So anyway, this was, I mean, the production and the production from, of course, India, and the import into China was increasing massively. Which brings us to what was happening in India. So while the British were fucking over China, they were also fucking over India quite badly.
No. Why did I never know about this? Also, what happened to all the opium produced in India? Where the fuck did it go? The nation wants to know.
Sure.
Oh, that rhymed.
Okay. So the East India Company's opium monopoly in Bengal and Bihar exploited millions, right? Through
Hmm.
through forced cultivation, through debt cycles, and we are going to get into that, through also child labor. And they were generating massive profits while fueling what we spoke about earlier, the famine, and also peasant
Hmm.
revolts, right? And yields peaked at around 58,000 chests with around 65 kgs each times 58,000 annually by the year 1830s. Yeah. Okay.
Hey.
I found an extensive research done by this gentleman called Dr. Rolf Bauer. He's a professor of economic and social history at the University of Vienna. And BBC interviewed him. They write about Dr. Bauer just to give you an idea of the amount of research that went into this. So the BBC article says, for years, Dr. Bauer trawled through archival documents looking at the costs of producing opium and paying money to farmers. He also examined an exhaustive history of the trade, the 1895 report of the Royal Commission of Opium, which ran into 7 volumes and 2,500 pages. It contained 28,000 questions and hundreds of witness reports on the use and consumption of opium in India and studied how the colonial government regulated its production and consumption. So, this man is reliable, right? He's done a
Hmm.
lot of work. So, let's get into,
I have
yeah,
one question. How much opium did he consume
he
during the
didn't.
research?
I have to give him the benefit of doubt and assume that he did
I'm
not.
sorry, then I don't believe a single word he's saying now. Without that first-hand experience and information, how can I trust you to give me the objective information if you haven't tried the product itself?
Because it's not
The
about
product that you're
consumption.
researching in the first place.
It's not about consumption as much as it is about production. So we are good, Sandy.
He clearly can't produce it on his own, no? So
Okay,
he
so
had to
we are
consume.
we are going to get into what he found. So the
Disappointed. Sandy's very disappointed.
okay, so the same BBC article says this is how the East India Company ran the trade. Some 2,500 clerks working in 100 offices of a powerful colonial institution called the Opium Agency monitored poppy farmers, enforced contracts and quality with police like authority. Indian workers were given commissions on every seer. A seer is a traditional use of mass and volume used in like many parts of Asia. Okay. So every seer of opium delivered on their beat. In the thriving state-run global trade, exports increased from 4,000 chests per year in the beginning of the 19th century to more than 60,000 chests by the 1880s. Opium, says Dr. Bauer, was for the large part of the 19th century the second most important source of revenue for the colonial state. It was only outmatched by land taxes. We know very, very well about land taxes, right? The
mm,
the revenue system, the revenue collection system, and we have spoken about this briefly in a previous episode, that the revenue collection system with land taxes was extremely exploitative, right? The government's opium industry was one of the largest enterprises on the subcontinent, producing a few thousand tons of the drug every year. A similar output to Afghanistan's notorious opium industry today, which supplies the global market for heroin, Dr. Bauer says. More importantly, the crop, he adds, had a lasting negative impact on the lives of millions. Interest free advance payments were offered to poppy farmers who could not access easy credit. By itself, this was not a bad thing for those producing the global market. What made it bad for them, according to Dr. Bauer, was what they paid for rent, manure, irrigation, and hired workers was higher than the income
mm,
from the sale of raw opium. And we are going to get into that, how exactly this was bad, right? Like what they were paying. In other words, the price peasants received for their opium did not even cover the cost of growing it. And they were soon trapped in a web of contractual obligations from which it was difficult to escape. Stiff production targets by the Opium Agency also meant farmers, the typical poppy cultivator was a small peasant, could not decide whether or not to produce opium. So they took away that
mm,
agency as well, right? They were forced to submit part of their land and labor to the colonial government's export strategy. Local landowners forced their landless tenants to grow poppy, and peasants were also kidnapped, arrested, and threatened with destruction of crops, criminal prosecution, and jail if they refused to grow the crop. It was a highly coercive system, Dr. Bauer says. Right? So let's break this down, right? What was actually happening here? Basically what Dr. Bauer calls the agency system, right? And I've taken
mm,
this part from a paper that was published at the University of Vienna by a student, but under the guidance of Dr. Bauer, right? So the agency system, it's broken down into four parts, right? First part, the East India Company made sure that they were the only ones producing opium, right? Which meant that private cultivation of poppy, the production of opium, and its trade were made illegal. So, other than
mm,
East India Company, nobody else could produce, right? Then licenses were given to small farmers, allowing them to officially grow poppy and produce raw opium. So, first you restrict every other form, and then you give license to small farmers to produce poppy, right?
mm,
East India Company officials working at the opium department closely followed this work process, monitoring the peasants. The third part, there were predetermined prices. Now, this is the production part, right? Now, let's talk about what happens when the poppy is produced and harvest season comes in, right?
mm,
So, there were predetermined prices for the opium. And when the harvest season approached, the farmers had to sell their full intake of raw opium to the East India Company according to these prefixed prices, right?
mm,
So low quality of the product was punished with less money, and they even levied fees and taxes on them for low quality. So not only are you selling at a lower price than you would sell in a free market. Free market exists only and only for the West. It doesn't exist for people they are colonizing, right? But also, if the British determined, if the opium department determined that this was low in quality, they would have to pay taxes. The peasants would have to pay
mm,
taxes, right? And the final fourth part, After the raw opium was officially handed over to the East India Company agents, it was brought to one of the two factories that they managed, right, which were also owned and operated by the East India Company. There, the raw produce was made into the finishing product and assembled into balls of opium, and then they were pulled onto huge these chests, right, like big wooden crates, and then which were called chests, and then these chests were exported, were transported into Calcutta. Here, the drug was auctioned off to private merchants. So all of the now auctioning means massive profit, right? So all of the profit was retained by East India Company because you're buying at a low fixed price and selling at an auction at a bid, right? So it's obviously a huge profit margin. These merchants, private merchants, then sold the drug to China or wherever they wanted to, mostly China. That meant also that for the East India Company, the responsibility of the opium ended officially in Calcutta. So they covered their bases everywhere, right? At the cost of everyone else. At the cost of these private merchants. I don't have too much sympathies with them, but they were there. At the cost of the farmers, at the cost of Chinese citizens, at the cost of China or the officials, everybody, right? East India Company was the only one that was gaining. Plus, there was the issue of labor conditions. So each harvest season required the workers to work 100-hour weeks for 12 weeks at a stretch. Might I remind you that the pay does not increase, it's not minimum wage system. So the pay is not increasing on, there's no wage. You're producing at your own cost. You've bought the license, you're producing at your own cost, at your own labor, and you are still selling at the same price. So 100 hours weeks for 12 hours at a stretch, you are not being compensated for it, right? To give you an example of what was happening, Karl Trocky, he's a historian, he says this about the opium production in Patna. I am quoting. In Patna, there were 1,000 men employed as cakers. Cakers were the ones who were making them into those balls. 1,000 men were employed as cakers who worked from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day in the huge sheds erected for the factory. They labored through the hot season in temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius. A bell was rung every 20 minutes and each cake maker's output was checked. The average output for the Patna factory was between 16,000 and 20,000 cakes daily. Now, during the lead up to the first Opium War, India was suffering as much as China was. The only and only people gaining were the British.
Britishers.
Yeah, right?
And they were not even getting high at the same time, dude. It's not as if at the very least you can be like, okay, fine, I've grown this, might as well enjoy a little bit of it. I'm sure they must be tracking that as well,
Yeah,
right?
they were very, very strict, like we have discussed, very strict regulations in place, right? I mean, you don't have food to eat. Who's thinking about getting high at that time? You don't have the ability
Fair
to
enough.
survive,
That's fair.
right?
That's fair. Yeah.
So this was during the first Opium War. Okay. Now let's get back to China, which is now this is the lead up to the second Opium War, right? So the Treaty of Nanjing allowed Westerners to start flocking into China. And this time, it wasn't just using trade and military, but also the church, right? So Christian missionaries started coming in. And obviously, China wasn't too happy about this, right? So China tried to keep finding excuses to not let Western diplomats in China. And now the British and French were not happy about this, right? So now comes the part where what West does best, which is another war, right? So I'm quoting from the Asia Pacific Foundation article again. In 1856, a second Opium War broke out and continued until 1860. When the British and French captured Beijing and forced on China a new round of unequal treaties, indemnities, and the opening of 11 more treaty ports. This also led to increased Christian missionary work and the legalization of the opium trade. Even though new ports were opened to British merchants after the First Opium War, The Chinese dragged their feet on implementing the agreements, and legal trade with China remained limited. British merchants pressed their government to do more, but the government's hands were tied because the Chinese government in the capital city of Beijing restricted who it met with. In October 1856, Chinese authorities arrested the Chinese crew of a ship operated by the British. The British used this as an opportunity to pressure China militarily to open itself up even further to British merchants and trade. France, using the execution in China of a French Christian missionary as an excuse, joined the British in the fight. Right? As far as the West goes, military and missionary was the same purpose for them, so it's fine.
mm,
Joint French British forces captured Guangzhou. Remember, this is the main port, right? So, joint French British forces captured Guangzhou before moving north to the city of Tianjin, also referred to as Tianjin.
mm,
In 1858, the Chinese agreed on paper to a series of Western demands contained in documents like the Treaty of Nanjing, but then they refused to ratify the treaties, which led to further hostilities. Okay. To be very honest, I can't blame China for this because you are forcing upon them
mm.
things that they did not want, right? Like that's they are a sovereign, at least were a sovereign nation by this time, and they had every right to reject an import of certain things, right?
Yeah.
So
Just out of curiosity, at this
yeah,
point, was China a monarchy or was it
yes,
more of
they were still under the
it was a
Qing
monarchy,
dynasty.
right?
Qing dynasty
Yeah.
fell in 1912. They were the last imperial dynasty, and after that,
Mm,
the Republic of China was formed. I continue the quote. In 1860, British and French troops landed near Beijing and fought their way into the city. Negotiations quickly broke down, and the British High Commissioner to China ordered the troops to loot and destroy the Imperial Summer Palace, a complex and
mm,
garden where Qing dynasty emperors had traditionally handled the country's official matters. Right? So, their form of parliament. Shortly
mm,
after that, the Chinese emperor fled to Manchuria in northeast China. His brother negotiated the Convention of Beijing, which, in addition to ratifying the Treaty of Nanjing, added indemnities and ceded to Britain the Kowloon Peninsula across the strait from Hong Kong. The war ended with a greatly weakened Qing dynasty that was now confronted with the need to rethink its relations with the outside world and to modernize its military and political and economic structures. It was bad, right? Like Qing dynasty faced multiple issues after this. They were greatly weakened. When I say war, like initially in the first Opium War, it was merchants versus officials, right? So it was on the coast and everything. So damage was there, but it was limited. Here, British and French, fully entered the country. Like there are horrifying cases. There are cases of burning down buildings with people and refusing to give aid, right? If that sounds familiar to what is happening today with refusing aid after completely destroying a place, well, it's been going on for a while now. So they completely destroyed the nation by the second war. And also there led to a lot of internal revolts because now there were other people there. Now there were minorities that had come in from outside. And
mm.
again, I am not saying that China did not have issues. Much like India, minorities weren't always treated great, right? But that does
I
not
think that
mean
is pretty much true for everywhere across the world,
everywhere across the world.
anywhere in history at any point of time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that
But
goes without saying, I feel.
exactly. But to solve that issue, you don't create more issues, right? And I hear this argument about Palestine as well, that why are LGBTQ people in favor of Palestine when Palestine does not recognize any rights of LGBTQ people? Of course, that's a problem, my friend, but that does not mean that external powers are allowed to come in and destroy the whole damn country. Like, your country has
Yeah.
issues. Would you allow other people to come in and take over? But that has been the Western MO since forever.
Mm,
Talking of Western MO, We're also a small cog in the large wheel of capitalism. And to that effect, here is a very short break, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back. Hope you had a good break. And now back to the episode. Over to you, Ashmita.
Yeah. So we have spoken about the first and second Opium Wars and how what the process was. Now let's talk just a little bit about the consequences, because the consequences were like they were. I thought of making this a much longer section, but it would be too large. They were far reaching, right? One thing which was after the first, which was after the legalization
Hmm.
of opium, the consumption of opium did not actually increase, right? So the National Bureau of Economic Research found this out, which is in US. And usually US authorities are not too reliable on
Hmm.
findings across Asia, but I haven't
What
found
makes you
anything.
say that?
But anyway, even if the consumption did not actually increase, that does not mean that the British, the Americans, or the French had any right whatsoever to intervene in the trade policies of a completely different sovereign nation, right?
Hmm.
That's what I have been harping on, and that's my main point at the bottom of the episode also, that no matter what challenges a country is going through, you don't have a right to invade them. That's not how civilized society is supposed to work. But the West has
Hmm.
always
How would you know? You're
considered.
not a part of civilized society,
That is
Ashmita.
true. That is true.
Hmm.
As
Got you there.
as one of the colonized, uh, you know I would strongly take a stand on this. But this has never stopped our beloved OG colonizers, right? Like, they continue doing this, and the consequences have been far reaching for China in this as well. For all colonized states, there are consequences that we still face to today, that we haven't been able to recover from. Specifically for China, by the end of the 19th century, China was seeing a lot of social unrest. So there was, including this one rebellion, which was a nonsense rebellion, and someday we'll talk about this. It's called the Taiping Rebellion, that happened from 1851 to 1864. So the second war fell like in between. This was a Christian religious movement led by the Heavenly King, Hong Xiuquan. Again, I have
Sorry.
no idea if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
I thought you were referring to Jesus. Oh,
Nope. This was
That's why I laughed.
Nope. This was a different king who was born in China, started following Christianity, and then started off his own cult. Eh, And they swept
Oh.
from the south to establish the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, and it controlled roughly a third of China for over a decade,
Hmm.
right? And opening global trade before China was prepared for it meant that local industries could not compete with mass production, right? Which is
Hmm.
that's China's GDP suffered. But this is slightly ironic to me, because I think eventually China did a little too well with the whole mass production shebang. So I sort of blame the British and French and Americans for that as well. That it hasn't been great for the world at large. So China's entire political, economic, and social structure was weakened. Before the Opium Wars, China definitely had issues, but they had far more after, like everything in Asia that the West touched, right?
Hmm.
So that brings me to the end of the episode. Do you guys have thoughts?
on opium?
Please do not give your
Need
thoughts on
some.
opium. Please
Need some.
do not give your thoughts on that. Okay.
No, historically, we all know that Britishers were, I mean, how Britishers were, and it's not surprising,
Yeah.
but very unfortunate.
When you go to the stories of what was happening,
Yeah.
So earlier, when I was preparing this episode, I was like, I will focus on the smaller stories of of all of the different things that the British did, all shitty things. But the larger picture, at least I didn't know so much about it. It
Yeah.
is not taught very well. So I was like, maybe we focus on this first. And some other episode we might do for all the little nonsense that added up.
There was this small documentary that I was watching that talked about the entire Himalayan region and the Ganga River and how the entire region is so rich. Even with that, how Britishers led to a famine. That particular region is the most rich soil in the
Yeah,
entire country, and even then they led to a famine.
yeah. That was one of the main reasons that the famine was in Bengal, because
Yeah,
all of the
yeah,
production happened at that point of time in Bengal. We still rely on Bengal and Punjab quite a lot for our agricultural produce, and the British completely fucked it up. And
yeah.
it's not just in India, you see this across the globe. The mass production that kicked off. So we were, before the British, we relied a lot on local communities producing things mostly in a sustainable manner, because we did not have the
Hmm.
opportunity to sort of increase production in a mass way. There were certain terrible practices, but instead of solving out things that were broken and flawed, British broke it even further. So that has happened across the history, across countries. Like it is, they had one playbook and they put it in place everywhere, and that's how we have reached where we have.
I mean, it worked everywhere, so why
Yeah.
change it, no? Why
No,
fix
fair.
something which isn't broken?
Sure.
Terrible,
What?
Sandy. Terrible.
What?
Talking like a prime minister.
Okay.
I mean, the country would be in complete ruin if I were the prime minister because I genuinely don't feel like working half the time. So I
That's
definitely,
Same.
I
That's
definitely, I
same.
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
can't be working like 17, 18 hours a day like great people do.
Nobody's doing
So,
that, so you're
hmm,
fine, Sandy. You would be
Yeah.
okay.
The only difference is that you'll be made to travel a lot, which you don't like.
Yeah.
But work-wise, you
I mean,
both
at
are
least
doing
I'll
the
travel
same
in
thing
comfort,
then.
right? I'll be able to
Yes.
travel in comfort. So there will
Yes.
be people
Yeah.
taking care of my every whim and need.
Yep.
So people
No,
will be at my beck and call.
but you'll have to wave all the time. Is that what you want to do?
I mean, I can hire someone to wave on my behalf. So
Also,
there are contingencies around that.
also you don't need to have your photo pasted on every single, like, billboard, vaccine certificate, all of this. You don't need to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that. That's
I'll
absolutely
have probably
nonsense.
one decent photo which I'll be using for the next 40 years.
No,
So
I won't. I won't be surprised if the Prime Minister's office is looking for a photo and they won't be able to find any photo of you because I struggled for that.
yes,
So I know the
yes,
struggle.
because there are a handful of photos of mine existing out there in the internet.
That is true. Okay, this brings me to the recommendation
I
of the
think you
week.
both have talked me into becoming the prime minister now. And
Wow,
will you
Sandy.
join my party?
To be very honest, I would much rather that you be the prime minister, because right now I'm like, please stop doing what you're doing. Like, forget about doing other good things. Firstly, stop the shit show that is carrying on. So I would be in support of you, Sandy.
I'll
Okay.
legalize opium as my first act in the of Congress.
Okay, my recommendation of the week.
Recommendation time.
Because we are talking about colonization, I want to talk about a book called Babel by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang,
Hmm.
before also I have recommended a book by her. It's called, well, The Poppy Wars. Poppy Wars is a fictionalized depiction of a lot of things, including opium addiction, but also Japanese invasion. So I would highly recommend that again as well. But Babel, also by R.F. Kuang, Rebecca Kuang. She has written this book. This book is, it's a fantastic read. Okay, so do you all know about the Babel Tower, like in biblical this thing? So it's basically a, huh? Go ahead, Sandy.
Go on, go on. No, no, I've heard of it. Yes, go on.
Yeah, so it's she has taken from that. It's essentially a language,
Hmm.
like institute of sorts. So she has taken that literally and made it into, in Oxford, there is this Institute of Translation called Babel, Babel. And in this book, it talks about, there's, of course, true to R.F. Kuang's style of writing and what she writes about. It's a fantasy novel, so there's magic and everything. That is all there. But it was also a very dark and disturbing book because it is about colonization and it is about student revolt and the cost of rebellion. It's one of the most fantastically written book that I have read, and I would highly, highly recommend reading. Very, very honestly, reading everything by Kuang. She's an amazing writer. I think while she was writing her first books, just the Poppy War series, she was in Cambridge studying. Now I think she has graduated. It's been quite a few years. Very talented author. One of the best fantasy novels I have ever read is the Poppy War series and also Babel. And it is, I would highly recommend it. Check her out on Goodreads as well. She recommends a lot of books as well. That's how I get much of my fantasy recommendations, by following her. And yeah, that is my recommendation of the week. Please help us reach out to more people. Please do what you do, like, comment, share this episode, rate us on wherever you get your podcast, wherever you are listening to us. If you enjoy what we are doing, apart from, of course, dropping us a note, please share it with your friends and family. That is how we are reaching everybody that we are reaching, by people recommending us. So if you like us, please do that. All right, until next time, bye bye.